It's no secret that cold exposure has become a trending topic, with countless online voices praising its benefits. But what does the science actually say? In this video, we'll take a look at cold exposure, specifically cold water immersion and its potential psychological benefits. To keep things concise, the literature on this subject can be summarized as follows. The scientific research on the direct effects of deliberate cold water immersion remains incomplete. However, the theoretical basis behind its potential benefits on our general health and well-being is very strong, and anecdotal reports of its positive effects are widespread and consistent. Now, let's turn to the theoretical mechanisms, and by that I mean the physiological effects we do know cold exposure has on the body, and from these, the logically inferred benefits we might expect if this practice were adopted consistently over the long term. A quick note before we begin, cold water immersion is not suitable for everyone. If you have a pre-existing medical condition, especially related to the heart, blood pressure, circulation, or respiratory system, or if you're unsure whether this practice is safe for you, please consult with the appropriate clinician beforehand. Now, let's get into it. When we talk about cold exposure, what we're really talking about is a stressor. A stressor is any internal or external condition that threatens or is perceived to threaten our internal balance. Stress, more specifically the stress response, is the body's attempt to restore that balance. In the context of cold exposure, the acute stress response is known as the cold shock response. From the moment you're immersed in cold water, thermoreceptors in the skin send signals to the brain, particularly the hypothalamus, triggering a cascade of physiological reactions. These include the rapid release of norepinephrine, adrenaline, and cortisol. Subjectively, this is most often noticeable through the rapid increase in heart rate, breathing rate, blood pressure, and sometimes even a sense of panic. Now, alongside the indiscriminate stress, our body has to adapt to the particular stress it's under, in this case being the cold. First, in order to reduce heat loss, the blood vessels near the skin tighten, a process formerly known as peripheral vasoconstriction. Then, shivering begins. Rapid, involuntary muscle contractions that generate heat. But even more interesting is non-shivering thermogenesis. Through the release of norepinephrine, the body activates brown fat, a specialized tissue that burns energy to produce heat. It's this process in particular which has sparked a lot of interest into the potential long-term benefits that cold water immersion may have on our metabolism. While immersed, the mind can be our worst enemy, the brain our best friend, triggering the release of serotonin, dopamine, endorphins, and the aforementioned noradrenaline. This is an intelligent way our body utilizes its resources to overcome the adversity it faces. Noradrenaline, alongside its effects on metabolism, modulates mood, attention, and alertness. Serotonin, synthesized in response to signals from the Raphe nuclei, promotes the stabilization of mood in a situation which often heightens our emotional state. Endorphins, acting on opioid receptors, reduce the perception of pain, helping to counteract the discomfort of cold exposure. Whereas dopamine reinforces this behavior by creating a sense of reward and motivation to endure the stress. The release of these neurochemicals is hypothesized to be an evolutionary adaptation, promoting endurance in adverse conditions by dampening discomfort and encouraging sustained resilience. On exiting the cold water, for most, there's an inherent feeling of clarity, a perfect sense of alertness, tempered by a sense of calm. There's a reason for this. The complex interplay of neurotransmitters and hormonal cascades, initially produced solely to facilitate an adaptive response to the encountered stressor, persists to varying degrees even after the event has passed. With endorphin levels still raised, cortisol levels generally begin to decrease towards baseline. Noradrenaline and dopamine levels remain high for a considerable amount of time post-immersion. In one study that is commonly cited, we see that noradrenaline is elevated by 530% and dopamine by 250% from baseline levels, both of which remain elevated even at the final measurement point, 1 hour after immersion. Now, this is a considerable finding. There are very few activities that produce such a sustained increase in these neurotransmitters without a subsequent drop below baseline, and is undoubtedly a major reason why so many report significant mood improvements following this practice, as well as studies demonstrating its positive effects on depression, fatigue, anger, vigor, esteem, and tension. It also may go on to explain the psychological benefits that have been demonstrated in one systematic review of over 3,000 participants, which demonstrates a significant reduction of stress reported by participants 12 hours after cold water immersion. And to extend that one step further, a fascinating study that looked specifically at its effects on increasing resilience, not just improving our ability to tolerate the cold, but also our capacity to handle stress in general. The study found that individuals who underwent repeated cold water immersions were better able to tolerate exercise under low oxygen conditions, implying a general improvement in stress resilience, not just to the cold. They demonstrated this via both a reduction in psychological symptoms compared to the group that did not undergo cold water immersion, as well as a measurable decrease in physiological markers of the stress response, namely reduced levels of catecholamines, alongside reductions in heart rate, blood pressure, and breathing rate. So while direct evidence linking cold exposure to reduced anxiety in everyday life is still emerging, it's a promising area. And this study, demonstrating the process formerly known as cross-adaptation, using cold water immersion as a tool to reduce overall stress levels, alongside countless anecdotal reports to this effect, make this not just a plausible, but indeed a likely benefit of this practice. I've chosen to focus primarily on the potential psychological benefits that cold water immersion may have. Needless to say though, although the research again is not yet robust, regular, deliberate exposure to this non-infectious stressor generally appears to have positive effects on other systems, namely immune function, the cardiovascular system, and the maintenance of metabolic health. Another active area of research is its potential neuroplastic and neuroprotective effects, especially relevant for slowing the progression of neurodegenerative disorders such as dementia. So I've presented the current evidence, which is largely theoretical, in the sense that we understand what cold exposure does to the body, and how this might explain the many anecdotal reports of its benefits. It's important to note though, however, that the causal evidence is still not very robust, and by that I mean the evidence that demonstrates the direct physiological and psychological effects of cold exposure over sufficient time periods. This, I hope, will be actively studied further. Anyway, as always, if you like this video, please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Thank you for listening.